This is the What About You podcast. I'm here today with Sean Sloan, and we're going to start with a prayer. Do you want to start with a...
Nah, you start with
Okay.
a prayer.
I'll pray for the gift of music. I think music is one of the channels that can help us reach like the spiritual plane, can help us connect with God. So I thank Him for that gift. You know, we sing in church, and I think there's a reason why. It helps us to get into like an altered state of mind when we're listening to music, and can be comforting, can bring us to a range of emotions. There's also, I think, a spiritual element, so I thank God for that. I'll start by asking you, could you tell us a little bit about your background before you became a social studies teacher here at Cabrini High School?
Yeah. As a kid, I grew up in Harahan with my grandparents. I went to Catholic school my whole life, St. Rita in Harahan, and then ultimately went to De La Salle. Graduated the same year you did, 93, so we're the same age. Only difference is De La Salle got girls in uniforms my senior year. After that, I went to college at University of Georgia. I was never technically a legal resident of Louisiana because my mom moved to Georgia, I don't know, 1984 maybe, give or take, after she got out of law school. She couldn't really get a good job here, and so she moved up there, got a job with the government, worked for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals for a while. I don't know exactly what she did there, but she worked for them as a lawyer. So she established residency there. So I went to University of Georgia based on state residency. It was actually cheaper at the time than to go to De La Salle. But De La Salle didn't have any kind of out-of-state fees because I lived here. I just was technically a legal resident of there. So I went there instead of LSU. Went there for 4 years, loved it. Athens, Georgia is a great little town. I always describe it as like a university if it was attached to like a clean French Quarter, like a nice little small town, and then you go down the highway a little bit and it's like Veterans Highway with car dealerships, Walmarts, a mall, stuff like that. So you kind of had the best of everything.
Have you enjoyed how well they've been doing in football lately?
Oh, absolutely. I was so excited when they won the national championship both times back to back. I was hoping they would have done it a third time this year, but, you know, Alabama. I'm not a big Alabama fan. I know a lot of people out there are. But I enjoyed my time there. I got a degree in history. I always loved history. Took a lot of interesting classes besides just history. Took some film classes. Took a classical music appreciation class. A lot of really good things.
Pause you there because I took a classical music appreciation. I think it was just music appreciation, actually, and also for mine. And also took a visual art history one.
Oh, yeah. I never did that. I took film. I had 2 film classes when I was there where we actually studied film.
But I really loved those classes, and not like because, it's some easy A or something like that. No, I learned a whole lot that I still carry forward to this day. And I think it really just deepened my education because I didn't really know a lot about different. I mean, I knew what I knew, but I learned a whole lot more, and I gained a lot of appreciation, especially at that time. But even today, I became a big fan of all kinds of different Baroque and classical and romantic and modern. Bach is a big fan, and I like Mozart, some of the biggies, and then a lot of the people in the romantic, and then some of the stuff, especially in the early 20th century, some unusual kinds of things. Bolero I can think of, or pictures at an exhibition by Mussorgsky and stuff like that.
And then it gets into Gershwin. Rhapsody in Blue is one of my favorite pieces of music. That's a great one.
That's so beautiful because he takes what had been happening for 10 years or so with jazz and brings the classical background that he has and marries the two and just produces a wonderful piece of music.
And it sounds like New York. I've always seen it visually with New York, especially in Woody Allen's movie Manhattan, but it always makes me think of New York when I think of that piece of music. I've only been in New York once when I was a kid, but you see New York movies all the time, so it kind of fits there. And I feel it's like it's used in a lot of New York movies as well. I did also take a classical music appreciation class in high school as well. Fine arts credit. I think we needed less fine arts credits then than the kids do now.
I think so too, because I don't remember I took chorus, and actually the senior year, I think I had already decided, I had already gotten in. Well, I knew I was going to go to LSU, and I think I already had the ACT to get into it. Then they said, well, okay, senior year, do you want to take physics or do you want to take one of these other options? And chorus was the option. Yeah. So I said, I'm going to take chorus.
I took physics instead.
Oh, you did? Yeah. I kind of regret it because, people say how useful or how great physics is, the stuff you learn. but I wasn't too good with the STEM classes, so I was just, let me just take the easy way out.
Yeah, well, the music is probably more enjoyable, so to speak.
Yeah.
Less hectic. I don't think we had a choral class or chorus class when I was in high school at De La Salle. I mean, I was there mostly when it was boys, so maybe now they offer one with girls, but we never did that when I was there. But you want to talk about music. We started mentioning a little bit about classical music and all. I'm not a big classical music fan.
Not me necessarily either.
I like the greatest hits kind of that you know of. Beethoven's Fifth, like we said, Rhapsody in Blue, some of the big ones. And I have a few classical music records, but I don't have that many. They're mostly boxed away at the other house. I don't really listen to them very often. I mostly listen to 50s through, say, 90s pop rock kind of stuff, all different types of pop rock, soul, R&B, mixed in with that, not just heavy rock and roll and heavy metal, but not a lot of heavy metal, not too much punk.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think you're same age as me, you know, we're raised in the same place, got a lot of demographic things and the same. And so, yeah, that's just was the music, you know, when you're coming up, like when we were boys, that was rock and roll seemed like that was all that there had ever been.
Yeah, you listen
to
to Led
really
Zeppelin.
Know there was other
Led
stuff.
Zeppelin, The Doors. Yeah. I mean, you go through your Led Zeppelin phase, your Who phase, your Doors phase.
I didn't really get into Led Zeppelin, I think, until maybe the end of the 80s is when I started to become familiar with them.
Me too.
And then I was sort of, for a long time, I was the Led Zeppelin person. And I still like actually my favorite group.
Really?
Yeah. Every once in a while, for a few years, I'll kind of get tired because I've heard it all.
Yeah.
But I just enjoy with them that, for me, you can listen to maybe 80% of their songs, and they're great songs. Some high percentage compared to like when we were growing up, there would be this good song, or even a song that now we wouldn't even consider good, but at the time it was a good song, and you'd have to buy the CD for $12 or something to get that one song, and all the other songs were lousy on it.
It's funny you say that because I tell a story to the kids in class that, I don't know if you remember when we were probably seniors, Lenny Kravitz's Are You Gonna Go My Way came out. And I love that song. I love that video. The song rocks. It's a great song. I had to go out and buy that CD. I bought it when it came out. That's the only rock song on the album. The rest of them are kind of slow ballads. Not that they're bad songs, but that's the only like heavy 70s rock song on that one record. I'm like, oh, this is so good. The whole album's going to be good. So to your point, you buy some things and you hear the one song and that's the best song on the album. The rest of them are good, but they're nowhere near in the same vein as the big hit single.
Yeah, that's one good thing about living in the future is that you don't get ripped off by music like we used to.
True.
The consumer just got ripped off by music, and the publishers benefited, and I think the artists benefited from all that. But then once Napster happened, with that kind of ended the whole the gravy train for
YouTube
them.
Streaming. Now when I am going to listen to a new song by a new group or something, I'll listen to the album on YouTube for a little while and see if I even like it before I even want to buy it, or even if I want to download it or anything like that. Because it's just changed. You know, back then you had MTV, but you only got the hits. You only saw whatever the hit single was they were pushing down your throat. And then you had to buy the CD or the album or the tape or whatever it was to be able to hear the rest of the album. Now you can just type in the name of the album and then full album after it on YouTube, and for the most part hear the whole thing. So that's what I love about it.
You'd have to listen to the radio and wait until that song came on. And then you try to record it off the radio station.
Yeah, so put your cassette player up to the speaker or something like that.
Yeah.
It never sounded that good, but you could at least... I did that with monkey songs one time when I was a kid. When they
the Monkees.
The Monkees, a TV show in the band The Monkees. Yeah, they had a resurgence in, I think, 1986. And so...
Yeah, because they were on Nick at Night.
Nick at Night. MTV had a whole day where they were playing old Monkees episodes, and they came back. So I was trying to record some of the songs off of the television, putting my tape recorder up to the TV speakers before I had a good stereo that could do that. And then ultimately I liked it enough to where, I'm going to go out and buy these albums. And they re-released them in 1986 or 87, so I bought them all. But yeah, same thing. If you didn't hear it on the radio, you had to wait to buy the whole album. Some stations, I think, would play other album tracks, especially people like the Beatles who had so many songs. You might not hear the big hit singles from them. You'd hear the other songs, but that was unique they were the Beatles. Maybe the Rolling Stones, the same kind of thing. But most bands, like you said, you'd have to see the hit single, see the video, or wait for it to come on the radio or something like that.
Another thing I remember that used to happen. So I imagine this happened with you in the 80s. You'd be sitting around with your friends in somebody's room, and you get into a verbal argument about something like Elvis was a member of the Beatles, somebody would say, and you'd say, no, Elvis wasn't a member of the Beatles. But nowadays, of course, you can just look it up on your phone, and it's 2 seconds for like, yeah, what are you thinking? But back then, you would have to go find somebody's mom and ask them. That was the source. Or you'd have to go find an encyclopedia, maybe.
Go to the library.
Yeah, if somebody there'd be all these verbal arguments or disagreements where someone would say something is the case, and it was very difficult to ever determine what was the actual truth.
You had to do a lot of research with it. Like with the research at your fingertips with your phone, you can look up any music title, any movie title. I was watching a movie the other day, and I wanted to see who the person was, and I just pull up the name of the movie. Oh, that's the person who plays that person in the cast. Whereas before, you didn't have IMDb, and you didn't have Wikipedia to be able to look it up. So yeah, you had to kind of research it. Oh, who was that Italian actor in that Hercules movie or something? I've seen that guy in something else. Wait, what is he in now? It's all right there at your fingertips. So same thing with, like I said, with music. The music's at your fingertips. Between Apple Music or downloading or YouTube, it's just there for the taking. And I think that's why the consumer change are different. Like you said before, we're not kind of getting cheated, so to speak, out of buying the whole album and only 1 or 2 songs are good. I mean, I have a lot of records, and I can't say that every one of them is excellent all the way through, though some will have just a few good tracks on it, especially with some of the 60s pop rock. They'll put filler out there. Not every Beatles song is a big hit, great song. Not every Rolling Stone song is a big, great song.
But they had a lot. They had more than the typical one hit on the record type of bands.
They definitely
And that's
did.
part of their popularity is so many of the songs on their records. So on that subject, when you think, I have 2 things I wanted to ask about. One thing is, recently last 5 years or so, I've begun to appreciate the Cars more.
I like the Cars a little bit.
And I don't know if you know the story behind them, but the guy who was basically the band, essentially, and his name escapes me at the moment.
Rick Ocasek, the main guy. Rick, the guy with the glasses, the lead singer.
Not the lead singer. It's this other guy, he's the guitarist, I believe.
Elliot Easton.
No.
There's Benjamin Orr, who was the bass player.
No.
He passed away from cancer a few years ago.
I'd have to look up his name, but I don't think it's one of. But anyway, he was an electrical engineer student at MIT.
No, that's Boston. Different band.
Oh,
the guy from Boston.
Yeah, I'm thinking of
No,
Boston.
that's okay. The guy from Boston, Tom Schultz.
Tom Schultz, that's who I'm thinking of.
Yes, he was from the band Boston.
Yes.
And so he was the engineer.
Yeah, electrical engineer, and then he was into rock and roll. He writes all these songs. He plays all the instruments. Yes. He's not a great vocalist, so he gets somebody to be the vocalist. And he puts out this album. I think it comes out like around 1976 or something, and it becomes like the biggest rock group all of a sudden.
I've heard every song on that album on the radio.
Incredible.
Every song.
And just one guy plays all the instruments except for the vocals. Yes. This guy who's an electrical engineer from MIT. Then he goes on. He invents a lot of musical equipment. He starts his own musical equipment business. He's still alive, I believe.
He is.
And just one of the there's all these amazing people in music.
Yeah, and they're doing this stuff in the background. Yeah, he overdubbed like 58, I don't know how many guitars on those songs. He just would sit in his basement and just keep adding more and more guitar tracks. And like you said, it's all him on the album. Now, they had a real band that would tour and play, but he had to hire a vocalist. The vocalist sadly killed himself, I think.
Yeah.
I think he suffocated himself in a car or something. I forget. He was a great vocalist. It's a shame.
That's how Peter Kennedy O'Toole, that guy, a Confederacy of Dunces.
Oh, yeah.
I think he passed the same way.
I think he did too as well. He was a brilliant writer too. It's a great book. Everybody from New Orleans should read that book. But yeah, that guy was fabulous, Tom Schultz, and they only did 3 albums. But that first album was such an explosive hit. I mean, every single song, like I said, I've heard it on the radio. And I know local radio, I'll talk with my friend Tommy a lot about this. Local radio, WTIX, plays a lot more deep tracks than you would hear on regular radio. But still, that album was such a phenomenon. The Cars are also a good band, too. Speaking of another band from Boston.
I do like the Cars as well.
Yeah, the Cars are great. They had a lot of great pop rock hits, power pop stuff in the late 70s.
I like that one, the album where they had this girl, she's a Russian model, and she's got real bright red lipstick, and she's driving behind the steering wheel of an old car.
That was the first album, The Cars.
Yeah.
Their main guy, Rick Ocasek, he later produced Weezer. And he kind of helped get Weezer their start. And Weezer's a super huge band. Kids know who Weezer is.
Another thing.
What was the other thing?
What are some records where there you say, these are the records, albums that they're not greatest hits, but you could just listen to almost every song. They're known as the greatest albums. Like one thing that comes to mind is Rumors for me.
Rumors is a huge album. I have a new copy of it that is cut at 45 RPM instead of the regular 33. It's spread out on the 2 records. I played it one day for my wife, Erin, and she could swear they were like standing in the room playing in front of me. The bass on some of those tracks, John McVie's bass is just so full. It sounds like he's standing right in front of you, like you're standing in front of his bass amp. It's that good. Rumors is a great album.
And was he married to one of the singers?
He was married to Christine, yeah.
And she just passed away.
She passed away a few years ago. Yeah. Stevie's still around. But they fight. They fight with Lindsay. Steve and Lindsay fight, and so Lindsay's out of the band. Lindsay had some type of medical surgery, open heart surgery or something. I forget what happened to him recently, but he's not with them anymore. It's just Stevie.
He had some really good songs, like after, I don't know if his solo projects, like the song Trouble. You know that?
Yes, and he has the big hit from National Lampoon's Vacation, Holiday Road,
yeah,
which is a great song. But Rumors is a huge album, huge seller. That thing, every song on that album is fabulous. I have a few copies of it. Some of the typical 60s stuff, like Sgt. Pepper, I mean, every song is great.
White Album.
The White Album, most of the songs are great. There's a couple, the Revolution 9 that just goes on sound collage is kind of a little weird. But that's a huge one. Trying to think.
So for that band, the great genius was John Lennon, right?
John and Paul together.
All together, too, but...
Because when you look at it, after the Beatles broke up, John kind of really didn't do a lot.
That's true.
For a few years, he went to be a house husband for his son, Sean. And he really only he never toured. He never toured. He only gave a couple of concerts after he left. And he got wrapped up with Yoko, and they got into a lot of avant-garde music and stuff like that. But he had huge hits with Imagine and Cold Turkey, Power to the People, Give Peace a Chance, of course.
And those came out right around the time that he died, though, right? It was like he was doing a comeback in the early 80s?
No, that was just like Starting Over was his big hit when he came back, right before he got assassinated.
Okay. When was Imagine, do you remember?
Imagine was 71.
Oh. Okay.
So it was a little bit post. Most of his big hits came right after he left the Beatles.
Oh.
And he had kind of a resurgence. But in his late Beatle career, he was, and it's not really widely known, but he was a heavy heroin addict.
Oh.
And so a lot of his later Beatles stuff is kind of, he doesn't have as many songs. Paul was a workaholic. If you ever watch the Beatles Get Back documentary, you can see Paul just sits there and he just sits at the piano and 5 songs come out of him.
Mm.
And John's
so put those two together, and
put them together, and you get the genius. But John shows up.
George did a lot in his own right.
George did a lot of his own stuff, but he kind of saved a lot of it for his solo career. And he had some big hits with My Sweet Lord.
Talking about at the beginning, call back to like religious, or spiritualism and music.
A lot of their music is spiritual, especially George Harrison. He got into Eastern religions, and a lot of it is dealing with that. But spirituality, My Sweet Lord, What is Life is a big one. You hear that one in Goodfellas.
Again, that's spirituality.
That's a huge song.
Right? Yeah, you're right.
He's got another one, Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth. He also got very involved with Bangladesh, his friend Ravi Shankar.
I liked when he got together with those other guys and did, what's the band?
Traveling Wilburys.
Yeah. They had a few of their
good
favorite songs were really good.
And it was a huge super group. You had Bob Dylan, you had Jeff Lynne from ELO.
Handle Me With Care.
Handle Me With Care was a big
And
one.
they all had their own little part where they would talk about great lyrics.
It is great lyrics. Tom Petty was in that. Roy Orbison, who passed away, and I think they replaced him with Del Shannon. Then Del Shannon died, but then it just became 4 of them. And really, Bob Dylan and Jeff Lynne are the only 2 left from that, because Tom Petty's dead and George Harrison died, Roy Orbison died.
And you can see how hard they're living if you look at how old they were when that Traveling Wilburys came out.
They're not that old either.
They're basically our age. And but if you put pictures of us next to pictures, they look maybe 15 years older than we do.
They do.
Because they were really, I guess, they got famous young, all of them.
They did.
And they lived a hard lifestyle, I imagine.
They lived hard lives. A lot of touring, a lot of drinking, drugs, smoking, all that weighed on them. I talk about that all the time when we look at movie actors who are from the 1950s. And you say, oh, William Holden, he looks like he's 50-something. You look it up and he's 32.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, that guy lived hard, Same thing with a lot of these musicians. They look worn out.
I think a lot of it's this because smoking was so prevalent, even to the point when we were growing up. So, I mean, there were ashtrays everywhere. People were smoking in their living room when we were boys, everywhere you went.
We talked about that the other day. My grandparents didn't smoke, but my wife's parents smoked heavily. Her dad smoked the pipe, and her mom was not a chain smoker, but she said she'd wake up at 2 a.m. or whatever, go to the bathroom. Her mom's sitting at the kitchen table having a smoke at 2 a.m. Like, they were highly addicted to it. But it's what they did then. They were kids of the 40s and 50s.
Almost everybody did. You know, that was that was the way of the world. It was the way of the world,
but it wore you out, and it made these musicians age. It made these musicians made their skin look old, yellowed them, grayed them. And then when you add in the rigors of touring and songwriting and all, I mean, yeah, they're millionaires. They get to live a nice life, but the millions only keep coming in if you produce music. And you are constantly in a situation where, we've got a new album, we've got to come out, or else, they forget about you. Yeah,
and a lot of, those people, they have it all.
Anyway.
But they're not happy. Mm-hmm. They're miserable people. They're not as happy as you and me.
Correct. Look at Kurt Cobain. I mean, the guy was sitting on top of the world. He never wanted to be the poet of his generation, of our generation, but he gets that and he can't handle the fame, and he ends up killing himself. So, yeah, he had it all. Toured around the world, had eaten probably the finest foods, sleeping in the finest hotel rooms and living in the nicest houses, but the fame is going to get to him.
Yeah, and well, not only the fame, but to me, that the lesson there is that having it all doesn't mean anything.
No, doesn't mean you're
happy. It all is nothing. It all doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It all is just the fame and the comforts are just like earthly pleasures and this kind of thing. That's a dead end road. It ends. It actually conversely leads to misery. It leads to emptiness a lot of times. And you get to the end of that road and you say, well, look, I have it all now. I'm famous. Mm-hmm. I'm rich. Why am I so miserable?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, so that's one thing, living a simple life, being good to other people, trying to have a relationship with God, spending time with your family, all these types of things. And also for me, something I try to work on more and more is just seeing my glass as half full instead of half empty.
Yeah.
Because nowadays the kids, you see people, the influencers on social media and stuff, and, well, they have it all. They're on a private jet. But then you don't find out that the private jet is actually just a studio that you can rent in the LA area. There's not even actually a jet there, and the clothes that they're wearing they have to return.
Sure.
But they make it sound like, they're going here, they're going there, they're having this great life. They have all this makeup and all this, and they get all this surgery, and then we look at them and say, well, I'm not measuring up to them. Something's wrong. I shouldn't be happy, or I'm not happy, and that kind of thing. And I say we need to put the phone down more often and just go live our life and realize that that's make-believe, and a lot of those people are very unhappy and having a lot of troubles, just like we all have troubles, right?
Yeah, but some of it comes, I think, from personalities. I mean, when you look at some celebrities, let's take a guy like Paul Newman, for example. Paul Newman kind of came out on the other end of it. I think he had his rough days in the beginning. As a young actor, probably got involved with drinking, but as he got older and he made money, he donated a lot back. He started that Newman's Own brand where he gave to, I forget what he called it. It was something to do with him and Robert Redford when they did Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, the Hole in the Wall Gang or something like that was what they were called. And I think he created a camp called the Hole in the Wall Camp for underprivileged kids. So he came out of it in his later years as a family man. He was married to the same woman for years and years and years, Joanne Woodward. And so he donated back, and he was afforded a nice life, being a celebrity and doing the nicest things. But I think it didn't wear him down. I think he still was kind of grounded. But that's not true of every celebrity. Some celebrities blow their money. Look at MC Hammer. He blew his money on all kinds of Michael Jackson.
It's especially difficult if you get celebrity young.
Yes.
And then a lot of times you reach your, and I'm putting in quotes, peak, and you're always looking back trying to get that again. And if you're living an ordinary life, the guy Arnold in the Different Strokes, Gary Coleman. Yeah, and then so later on he had kind of ordinary jobs. He
was a security guard.
And security guard, and people would just mock him. Celebrity in general and fame is just a very dangerous thing, but especially for a young person to have to deal with. And a lot of these people, they get it young. I think if it happens later on, you already have established yourself as who you are. You know who you are. Mm-hmm. I think it's a little easier to deal with. But my thing is, you can be a celebrity and be happy, and you can be a person that's anonymous to the world and be happy. But it's what Paul was doing as far as giving back to others. Mm-hmm. They say when you give, you get. And it doesn't have to be starting a salad dressing company. Yeah. It could be holding the door for somebody, mm-hmm. giving them a smile, saying, "Hi, how are you doing?" Giving a sincere listen to their issues that they're struggling with today and let them talk it out. Just simple things where the more I try to give back to others when I do, then at the end of the day, I just feel a lot better.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, too, with different people, and especially going back with celebrities, musicians and all, it depends on your ability to be able to transcend it. It depends on what kind of a person you are. If you have an addictive personality, you're going to crave that fame. You're going to crave those drugs. I was just reading a thing earlier today. Johnny Manziel, the guy who played for Cleveland, he said he lost 50 pounds recently because he just did tons of cocaine. He went to Vegas and just did tons of cocaine. He's got an addictive personality. He wants to be in the spotlight. Mm-hmm. But other celebrities can just kind of do what they do and live their lives. There's many millions of actors who are character actors. You see all these people background in these movies and he's like, "Oh, I saw that guy in that, or he's in that. We didn't recognize that guy from this movie." I watched that First Monday in October movie, the one with the Supreme Court, the one that you wanted me with Walter Matthau. It was good. And the doctor at the very end is the guy who plays Mr. Andolini on Three's Company. He's the guy who owns the bistro that Jack works for.
It's like the Flying Beagle? The Royal Beagle?
No, the Real Beagle was the bar that they were at all the time. Okay. Jack had his bistro in the later seasons.
Oh, and then they did a spin-off with that bistro, right?
They did a little spin-off with that called Robin's Nest, I think, where him and the girlfriend were running it for a little while, and he had a different boss. But like those character actors you see, I think a lot of those people most of them just live their normal lives. They just go behind the scenes and they just work sometimes. They're not super celebrities. They pop up in different movies, different TV shows here, and they're like, "Oh, I recognize that guy. He was in that the other day." They're just normal people.
Yeah.
And so they probably live, in some ways, a more comfortable life, so to speak, a more normal life, a more average life. And some of these musicians, they're not all big celebrities. There's a whole group of people called the Wrecking Crew, who are these 60 studio musicians, and they worked, and there's a great documentary about them.
Were they at Muscle Shoals?
No, that was the Swampers, but same kind of guys. Mm-hmm. Muscle Shoals guys were the Swampers. The Wrecking Crew were in the LA. They were the LA studio guys, and they just would show up and play the guitar on a track, and then they'd go home to their families. So they didn't really tour. They might pop up in a movie here and there, do a TV soundtrack or on a TV show. But they were just the working musicians, like the working actors, where they're not celebrities. We know about them now because we've gone back and dug into some of this stuff. And so, who was the guys playing on these Beach Boys songs? Or who was playing on those Aretha Franklin songs? The Muscle Shoals guys. They're just regular people. Like I said, they're probably living regular lives, just doing good things. That's just their job.
They're not constantly chasing fame because they realize, well, there's a place for that, and it's all fine and good, but it's a little piece of life. Yeah. Spending time with my family is important. Mm-hmm. Being good to other people is important. Spending time with my maker is important.
Yeah. It was a way to pay the bills. They did that. That was their job. They weren't touring musicians. They would go and play on a Herb Alpert song or play on a Stevie Wonder track or something like that because they were just studio musicians. They would show up 9 to 5 and record their guitar part or their drum part or whatever, and then they'd go home to their families and just live their regular lives.
Those guys, when they would become famous, some of them produced. Person I think of, like my favorite band I go back to is Led Zeppelin. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy Page, for a long time, he was a studio musician in London, and then he was in bands. But as a studio musician, not only did he perfect the thing he was great at with the guitar, but then he also became great at the production of the music.
He was behind the scenes twiddling knobs and all.
Yeah, yes. And so then once he forms Led Zeppelin, not only is he just masterful but he knows all these different sounds that he can make with various kinds of things, and then he knows how to produce it to make it sound brilliant, stuff that hasn't been done before and really hasn't been done since. And until he got taken over by heroin, then that's a similar, like with the Beatles, touring. He got eaten up by heroin and I think dark. Getting obsessed with dark arts and stuff, and then the brilliant drummer, he got taken over by alcohol. Yes. But then in the later years, it was Robert Plant who was doing a lot of the music. Yeah. John Paul Jones, and they weren't. I mean, Robert Plant's a brilliant frontman, but they weren't any in the class of Jimmy Page as far as like all the writing and the producing the sounds
and how to make the sound
and stuff like that.
Well, Brian Wilson was a lot like that from the Beach Boys. He could hear the music in his head. He knew exactly what he wanted to sound like. He'd go in the studio and twiddle the knobs, doing the production and everything. But he had serious drug breakdowns and other mental breakdowns and things like that. So that genius kind of comes with that, unfortunately, that dark side of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because to them,
extreme personalities can produce genius and pain,
but
or
obsession too. Their obsession with it, certain things. They've got to hear certain sounds, got to get them produced, got to get them on tape. So it's the same thing, same addictive personality, just maybe in a different way. And then when you add drugs in, like I said, it ages you. Going back to the Wilburys, they were all in their late 40s, our age, but they look like they're 65, look like they're 70, they're beaten down by life. That kind of a lifestyle. You have to, like I said, you have to just be, if you're a regular studio musician, you just, like I said, it's your job, you go home to your family, you got to spend time with them. And a lot of those guys would be on the road. I think one way a guy like Paul McCartney survived was he brought his family on the road with him. And he'd have the kids with him when he was on tour. And so he still kept the family around while he was doing his job. So he became a little more grounded in that sense.
He seems pretty normal, and so it's amazing somebody 18, whatever years old he was, and hits worldwide fame and has been worldwide famous ever since. And all that has to entail, all the burden that has to entail, and it is a tremendous burden. Sure, and to stay kind of a normal person.
There's pictures of him riding the New Orleans streetcar. He comes to New Orleans, and he's just riding the streetcar by himself, which is crazy. You would think a famous celebrity like that would have an entourage of bodyguards and people protecting him, but he just rides the train, rides the subway, because he's just still, I guess, just a normal guy. And so, I know he had a share of drug issues and things like that, and the fame of touring and all.
And that was just common, I think, especially in that time frame and into the late 60s and into the 70s and early 80s. That was not just the musicians, that was more of kind of the way of the world with young people with that, what do you call that, the baby boomer generation. That's what was done. That was the hip thing at the moment.
It was.
People didn't really see all the bad results of it. Just like smoking with the silent generation and some of the younger baby boomer generation, everybody was doing it. Then you start to, as time goes on, you see the results of that, and then the people turned against smoking, and now smoking is pretty rare. Same sort of thing with the drugs. A lot of those people, they saw what happened to their friends, or maybe even happened to them, but what happened to their friends, how their friends kind of got left behind by society, or they had their brains fried or this and that. And then those people had kids of their own, and they were supporting, the Just Say No to Drugs campaign, because they were like, hey, I've seen it. It doesn't end well, buddy. So
our generation's a little different when I talk about that in some of my classes, about how society's kind of shaped too with some of the drugs that are around it. Heroin big in the 70s, pot and LSD in the 60s. It kind of influences the music, the movies. But by the time you get to the 90s, when we were, late high school and college age, it's a whole different kind of situation because of Just Say No, because of we saw a lot more awareness about it. A lot of TV. You remember the very special episodes all the time on TV shows? Tonight on a very special episode of Growing Pains or something like that. And they would always talk about the dangers of drugs.
I remember when the girl in the family
from Growing Pains.
Yeah, and she had a boyfriend, and they did a special episode where he passed away.
That was Matthew Perry.
Drunk driving.
That was Matthew Perry from Friends. He was the actor on it, and she, the daughter on that show, she had serious problems with anorexia and bulimia and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you saw a lot of that, and so I think some of our generation looked at it and said, "Oh, we don't want that. That's kind of a bad thing." Because we're slightly later Gen Xers. I think early Gen Xers are still in that kind of vein. People who are probably graduated from high school in the late 70s to very early 80s might be a little in that vein. But later people, because we're like on the tail end of it, it's a little different because we saw the dangers of it.
And we were in the AIDS generation,
And we were in the AIDS generation too, where you started seeing awareness of that. And, this is this terrible thing. It can kill, because it was a death sentence back then. I mean, you got it. You died in a few months from...
And the media promoted that. They led you to believe, at least, that you were going to get it. Regardless even if you weren't in one of those risk groups that were getting it, they led you to believe that it was going to become where almost the majority of the people were going to get it just from regular,
And we saw celebrities come out either as homosexual that we didn't know, like Rock Hudson, the dad from the Brady Bunch, I forget his name. Robert Reed. And then we saw other people get it, like Arthur Ashe, who was not homosexual, he had a blood transfusion, and God, he had a medical situation. So you saw celebrities, and you're like, oh, wait, this happens to celebrities too. Kind of grew more awareness for that. And so, the dangers of the drugs, we saw those 60s celebrities, those 70s celebrities, we saw them with these dangers of drugs by the time we came about, and the big anti-drug campaign. So we kind of saw that with our celebrities, kind of influenced us, I guess, in a positive way to kind of stay away from that.
It reminds me about being history teachers, and one of the benefits is history repeating itself. And when we were young, we were coming out of the 70s where there was a lot of crime, especially in the big cities, and into the 80s with the crack epidemic.
Yes.
And then they got really tough in the late 80s, but especially into the 90s. And then there was very little crime from, let's say, the mid-90s all the way to 2010, 2015. But then there's been this movement the other way to just be a lot more tolerant of recidivists, of people that commit habitual crime. And nowadays we're dealing with a lot of the crime, but it's a cycle kind of. It's like, oh, let's be more understanding of people that commit crime after crime, and then people get fed up with all the crime, and then people get tough on crime. There's less crime, and that's just one example of the.
Well, I think some of it has to do too with drugs and drug use. It's come back more. Celebrities push it more. The idea that pot has been legal or mostly legalized in some places, or it's been less penalized. And so we're kind of seeing that cycle. I mean, a few years ago I had read that heroin was coming back, which is amazing that heroin, such a terrible, deadly drug, is coming back. I think we're just in another cycle as people always look back to the generation in the decade before. Remember, in the 80s, people look back to the 60s. In the 70s, people look back to the 50s because Happy Days and all that Fonzie was big in the 70s. The 90s, you kind of look back to the 70s a little bit. Now we're kind of looking back a little bit to the 80s when crack and other drugs were kind of coming back, meth and stuff like that. So I think we're just I think you're right, we're in a cycle.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, Sean Sloan, and we'll see you next time.
Excellent.